As of right now, the main focus, at least as far as the first two episodes went, was about Dan Schneider and his development of all that,
Yeah.
and the show
Was it
was obviously a
was it
spin-off
the
of all
that
that
played Sam and
was cast on there, and it talked to original cast members before Amanda Bynes got on, and it talked to cast members of the Amanda Show, and it on the one hand, the stories don't necessarily seem that surprising, as far as like from a Hollywood television filmmaking perspective, because any television show, I would say, made in a certain era will have the same issues just because that's what Hollywood was. That's what Hollywood was to a certain extent. That, people, once they got power, they abused it. There was certainly discrimination against women, discrimination against people of other colors. And yeah, I mean, just because it's Nickelodeon, don't think it's any different from any other kind of studio that you'll find out there. The only difference was that this was happening to children, and children, more so than anybody else in the industry, have to be protected. Under no other circumstance should anything happen to them.
And I agree.
One network that was giving children the chance to do stuff that they never got to do in the industry. And for that, it was groundbreaking. But for that, people
it came with a price. It came with a price. Am I right, Brian? It came with a price.
Obviously, yeah. Just because it's child stardom doesn't mean it's not stardom.
If I'm not mistaken, that's the same person that did something to Sam from iCarly. And that's why she would not come back for the reboot not really reboot, but the sequel thing that they did for the iCarly thing that came out a couple years back, where they basically showed them
Sam and Cat.
The what?
You mean the one that was on Sam and Cat?
No, they did a iCarly for like
iCarly reboot. Yes.
Yeah, iCarly reboot where they brought back almost all the original cast, and everybody kept asking, "Where's Sam?" Because Sam was part of iCarly, and then she spoke out about it. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the same guy that abused, and that's why she said that she won't come back on because it gives her too much.
Well, yes, the Dan Schneider, who of course I will always remember first and foremost as the fat guy on Head of the Class.
Yes, the guy with the computer back in the 80s.
Yes, back when if you had a classroom, everyone had to have an archetype or a job. The defining skill.
The jock, the nerd, Robin Givens.
Well, yeah. Oh my God, Brad Pitt was on there?
Yeah.
And then is that Danielle Fisher?
No, it's not Danielle Fishel.
Oh,
I don't know who that is, but there's the original cast right there.
My bad.
Or the most well-known cast of the group. But yeah, Robin Givens is in there, Dan Schneider, Howard Hessman from WKRP,
May he rest.
And what show was this?
Head of the Class.
Head of the Class.
Back in that 80s era where the intros were fantastic to every comedy series out there.
Or city-oriented and from the teacher's perspective.
Yeah. And it was always one of those things that every single year, the same cast were in the same exact class year after year. And people were like, that's weird.
And when they started aging, it's like, maybe you're a little bit too old looking to be a teenager.
But see, also, remember, Howard Hessman left and was replaced later on by. You got that? He was a Scotsman, by the way. He's a Scotsman. Talk like this a lot. He's a comedian.
Oh, what's his face with the mustache and the long hair?
Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly took over for Howard Hessman. Hessman quit.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh. Papa Boone. Oh wow.
Yeah. It was a very subdued. Who, by the way, actually got his own spin-off series from Head of the Class as that character. Yeah.
ABC's gonna ABC. They'll keep things going as best they can.
Yeah, that is true.
But yeah, so Dan Schneider started off on there, and then parlayed himself into working at Nickelodeon as a producer. Started all that, got these kids going with this, sketch sort of SNL light
Mhm.
kind of work that they were doing. But you watch the show, and it's like Schneider ended up being what you could look at him and you could see the kind of person he was. Like
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
see a big kid.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, if you're a big kid and you're given power, you abuse the hell out of it.
Mhm.
Because you never had power before when the world treats you badly. I get it.
But
So
at the
it's
same
unfortunate
time,
that he went ahead and did the things that he did, not even so much necessarily maybe to the cast members of the shows that he worked on, but definitely to the staff,
Mhm.
especially the writers. The two women writers that they've had from all that to the Amanda Show, the stuff they had to endure. I'm glad that they're going through what they're going through now, post everything. But when you watch the show and you hear about the things that they had to do or they had to deal with, especially from this guy who was basically like, you know, you thought he was doing something positive or doing something that maybe hadn't been done in so long, probably not since like the Mickey Mouse
Mhm.
Clubhouse or
Mhm.
what the Musketeers or whatever they were back then.
Yeah.
You don't see it anymore, but
Yeah.
he allowed an element into those studios, into those rooms that
Mhm.
really just took a life on its own. And Dan never did anything to wrangle it. He never did anything to right the ship. He just let stuff happen.
mm,
Why? Because he had the power to do so. Because Nickelodeon was a juggernaut as far as live action kids television. Whether it was, making the kids do Fear Factor things, which I never thought was a good idea, but when you see an actual kid, like no less than maybe 13 years old, being
Yep.
covered in peanut butter and being licked by dogs, it's a bit much.
yeah,
It's really a bit much. And back then, people just saw it as, oh, well, it's kids trying to do Fear Factor. It's like, kids shouldn't be doing Fear Factor. Maybe don't put the scorpion down the kid's mouth.
Mhm.
Maybe don't cover the kid in worms. Maybe don't leave the young women around with a guy whose last name was Handy. That was a red flag. And it all accumulated to this point where, okay, now Schneider's actually going to be sued. Now people are coming out and talking about it. And the second episode left off where the third one's probably going to go up to, where you have possibly one of the biggest names that Dan Schneider has ever created
hmm
going ahead and telling his story for the first time, that being Drake Bell. And if anybody knows Drake Bell from Drake and Josh or the Amanda Show or anything he's done since, especially his time on Twitter, you know that Drake has had his own issues with certain accusations and people saying this and that about him.
hmm
And it brings things into a different light if he was a victim of that stuff first,
Mhm.
not necessarily saying he's no longer vilified. Obviously he knows he's done wrong, I'm sure, but when you start to connect the pattern of what was done to him and then what he does to others, and it's all this nonsense that's swept under the rug just because of who the people are, it really makes you wonder if there's any hope for any kind of future for these actors. Some of them completely got out of acting, or some of them were pushed, and maybe, like you said, from the one from iCarly and Seven Max, they just decided to stop because they just didn't want to be in that business anymore. I
Yep.
mean, we've
You're right.
seen some successes. Obviously, the biggest probably being Ariana Grande, but
Mhm.
when you look back at some of the things she had to do, you have to wonder: did she care?
Mhm.
Was she aware? Does she think about it to this day? Just because they were kids doesn't mean they grow up and they forget about it, obviously. But
right.
even when they get out of the industry, that stuff sticks.
Mhm.
Same thing with Corey Feldman.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he's a poster child for it, even going back to the 80s. And look at him now with his band and his Angels. And You draw your own conclusions on that.
Right.
But yeah, how far have you gotten into it at this point?
He said they're releasing to the I didn't mean.
That was were you celebrating how far in he just got right there? Is that what's happening?
I'm not used to this because I'm not used to having a new phone, so I apologize about that. But no, there's only been 2 episodes that's been out, and then he said 2 more come out today.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's only a 4-part docuseries. Though I can imagine if it goes as far as it's supposed to go, there will be more.
And not just that, but I mean everything in the industry. You know, if there's money to be grabbed on something like this, you can guarantee everything, probably productions I have been on over the course of the last 14 years. There's going to be stuff coming out in there. I mean,
and this ain't the first time he's been called out, so I mean, they're finally doing something.
I mean, have I dealt with verbal abuse on a film set? Yeah, I have. You know, I mean, have I been uncomfortable in certain regards? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it glossed over? Yeah. You know, did SAG do nothing about it? Yeah. You know, did the PA laugh in my face when I complained about it? Yeah. You know, expect this to be just the start of a big line of stuff here, because this kind of stuff is the kind of things that audiences feast on and drool over. And,
right.
And they're going to drool on it. There's going to be money in it. So if there's money in it, you're going to see more. Wait until they'll find something like Kevin Smith at some point, probably too, because why not? You know, cut down the biggest heroes you can find in order to actually, like, you know, get ratings.
Look at the Wendy Williams story. That's only the beginning, because there's probably going to be stuff they're going to be like, okay, since you want to go after your situation, they're going to go after her.
I'm going to make a prediction. Inside the next 3 years, one of the holy grail people in Hollywood is going to have some kind of a documentary on them. And by holy grail, I mean like the Robert De Niro's, the Oprah Winfrey's, you know, people like that are on this absolute gigantic colossal pedestal. Something's going to come out about them, and it's going to go boom. And the audience is going to go ballistic for it and watch every single picosecond of the whole thing all the way through.
I don't know about Oprah, but I could definitely see something like that happen with Steve Harvey.
Okay. All right. That's a pedestal too. Yeah. I mean, Ellen DeGeneres got torn apart. So you know what, Steve, who knows? After 20 some years, almost 20 years of doing Family Feud, you know, and maybe his comedy acts from the 90s.
Well, plus he had his own like talk show, plus he had his radio shows, plus obviously stand-up stuff. And after Cat Williams earlier this year, you best believe Steve is on his P's and Q's, making sure he doesn't do anything to drudge up anything.
Some kind of a sacred cow is going to get slaughtered.
Yeah, but who's going to drink the blood? That's the question.
The audience. And they will pay, and they will buy the streaming service to drink that blood.
Well, I mean, we're now also living in a year where we have a very successful Michael Jackson musical, and there is a biopic movie being made about him. Whereas
everything's cyclical.
Yeah, whereas before the pandemic, or even during the first year of the pandemic, MJ was getting vilified because of the documentary that came out about him.
Yeah. Well, MJ, if I had to guess, I would say he probably had something called arrested psychological development. Yeah. What it is basically when you have enough childhood trauma, it permanently stunts your growth into adulthood. So part of the reason he acted the way he was is because he never had the normal childhood. So up here, he was constantly, like, say, 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever it was.
Right.
I think APD is part of the reason he was the way he was. You see it with sometimes other child celebrities.
Do you think that could have been the case with Schneider in this?
Possibly. I mean, I don't know enough about Schneider in this particular case, but if he was bullied heavily and psychologically because of how he looked and his character, you know, on Head of the Class, the dude always had food. He always had a donut. He was the nerd on a computer. That's the character itself. But growing up, yeah, he probably took a fair bit, you know. I can't say, I'm not justifying what he did. I'm only theorizing at best. Was that an APD situation? Maybe, you know.
And I agree with you, because it's not saying, all right, for the audience that's listening, it's not saying that we basically support or given a reason or trying to find a way to prove his innocence. We're saying that this is an actual psychological order, and something like that needs to be treated, because it don't need to be It needs to be looked at. And it needs to be treated. Yes, what they're doing is wrong, but there's certain actions that has to be addressed in a way where some stuff are intentional, and then there's other stuff that is a psychological disorder.
Mm-hmm. You
So
know,
It could be argued that if you were aware of this sort of stuff back when Dan Schneider was just starting out, and you saw the pattern of behavior that he was doing, and instead of just saying, "Oh well, that's just Dan being Dan," maybe a lot of this could have been prevented.
yeah,
Correct.
I think societally speaking, they're not ready to embrace that like they are certain other things like bipolar or depression or things like this. APD, I don't think people are really ready to give it enough weight to be like, okay, well, maybe there's something to it. You know, if there was something along the lines of depression or anxiety or what I'm going to call popular, diagnoses, maybe. But it's about what is socially acceptable, psychosis nowadays. The rest of psychological development, I don't think is one of them just yet.
But yeah, I'll save all the messy, dirty stuff for anybody that actually wants to watch the show, which I definitely think you should. Only
yeah,
No, no. It's not my cup of tea, Like I said, I like watching happy, fluffy stuff.
I like watching horror films, but that type of horror will make me
Yeah.
turn into a different animal.
I thought you said you were gonna watch it, Dave.
I am, but I don't like discussing it.
Oh, okay, he's gonna keep it internal. That's fine.
Yeah,
No judgment.
certain things.
Oh well, we're up. I know that again. This is before your time with being like.
Well, but I grew up.
Nice.
I probably would watch it because I grew up with a lot. iCarly came out during the time that I was a kid, so I was the audience of that show. I remember watching that stuff live, and so it shocks when you do find out about different people and stuff. Yeah, I'll probably give it a watch. Unless
All right, I at least got one person on board. That's good.
No, I'm gonna watch it. I didn't say I'm going to watch it.
No, Dave said he's gonna watch it. He's not gonna talk about it.
But that's why I'm saying I don't want to discuss any of the eccentricities that went on. I want you guys to watch it and get the full effect.
God.
Again,
Honest, I will probably give it an episode, but if it gets too much for me, I may have to turn it off. But we'll probably give it a shot. Kind of like when I watched the Jeffrey. I know this is a whole different thing, but when the Dahmer show came off, I only could give that about 2 episodes, and I had to shut it off.
Same thing. I that's all I could take. I was like,
to be fair, Dahmer was different.
I know
Dahmer was really different.
different things, and I'm not trying to compare the two. I'm just saying I only have tolerance on some stuff, so I will give it a shot, and that's all I can do.
I'm just saying, just from a television perspective, Dahmer was a reenactment, almost like a retelling from his perspective.
Yeah.
This is a documentary. This is
Yeah.
talking heads like we're doing right now, telling their stories with maybe like someone closing a door that says Dan Schneider on it to be like his office. That's as most acting as you'll get in this thing. Everything else is just clips and interviews.
That's why I was asking if the actress that played Sam was on that documentary, because she's talked about she even wrote a book about it. So that's why I was asking if they got her perspective on it. But I think
the fact that she did make the book and everything pretty much eliminates her from needing to be on the show. She's told her story, and very well, I might add. I think the book is very good, and I'm happy for her. But this is more of a spotlight for people that never got to tell their story, either back then when they were children or they saw what their children were doing, because you get a lot of parents in this thing, too, that were saying, I wish I had said more, I wish I had done more, but I didn't because I didn't want it to come back on my child. And then they see what happens, and you can feel the pain in them. But these are people telling their stories that never got to tell their stories in the first place. That's why Drake Bell being on this thing, it's such like a mind blower, because you never would have thought, especially when things were accused of him. You figure, oh, he's on this side of the podium, but really, he's also on this side too.
Yeah, but the reason why he's on that side is because he's basically confronting his demons and letting the whole story out the bag.
True. That's look. The majority of us are in this industry. You know, whether we're acting in front of the screen or doing stuff behind the screen. So we've seen things. We've heard things. We've heard nasty stories from other people about other places, other times. This is not necessarily new for us to hear these kinds of stories because it's always like worst case scenario is more than likely the best case scenario in some cases.
Right.
For the average fan of Nickelodeon, these are the people that unfortunately are going to end up devastated, but thankfully wiser and maybe a little bit more considerate to the people that they talk about or they watch or looking back and what it taught them as kids to adults. You know, it's basically deconstructing an entire generation of entertainment. You know, we talked about in '97 and how that's bringing back nostalgia berries and all that, and that was certainly from the same era. The '90s were just a way for loud expression, bright colors, and wackiness.
Right.
Extreme.
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 Yeah, everything with an X. But
Just like now with
These back then were extreme. These were actually extreme back then too. They had extreme corn nuts back in the '90s. Okay, can I just point that out?
yeah. No, if you didn't have an extreme version of the brand, nobody gave a damn.
Yeah.
Mountain Dew was extreme.
Toilet paper was extreme. Extreme bounty. This ain't your old quilted picker upper.
Yeah, with extra rolls.
Exactly. And now we have like, you know, anthropomorphic talking bears.